Welcome back to the Liturgy of Slaves, where we unearth the darkest tales concealed within the shadows. The mahogany box had rested in my grandmother's attic for decades, marked by the patina of age and abandonment. I found it during the sorrowful task of clearing her Victorian home after she passed at the venerable age of 97. The brass clasps had become tarnished, the hinges reluctant after years of stillness. When I finally managed to pry it open, the scent of bygone days drifted out, a strange mixture of old paper, faded perfume, and something indefinably musty that whispered of forgotten memories. Amid the yellowed letters and mementos of lives long finished, I discovered a photograph encased in an ornate silver frame, the date delicately engraved on its reverse, 1892. The sepia-toned image showed my ancestors posed stiffly before their rural homestead, a stern-faced patriarch with mutton-chop whiskers, a severe matriarch in high-necked attire, and 3 children arranged by height, their expressions solemn, as was customary for the long exposure times of that era. The photograph itself was remarkable only in its ordinariness, a typical family portrait from the late Victorian period. Yet, as I studied it beneath the single bare bulb, lighting the attic's gloom, my blood ran cold and the fine hairs on my nape stood on end. Standing behind my ancestors, partially hidden by shadow, was a girl. Her presence would not have been so unsettling had I not instantly recognized her face. The high cheekbones, the distinctive tilt of the eyes, the particular arrangement of features. They belonged to my cousin Emily, who had vanished without a trace during a family gathering at that very house in 2007, some 115 years after this photograph was taken. The resemblance could not be mere coincidence. The girl in the photograph wore period-appropriate attire, a high-collared dress with puffed sleeves, yet her face was unmistakably Emily's, down to the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. I sat amid the dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light, my fingers trembling as they traced the outline of the mysterious figure. How could Emily appear in a photograph taken more than a century before her birth? More disturbingly still, why did none of the family members acknowledge her presence? They stared ahead, oblivious to the figure looming behind them, her eyes the only ones in the photograph that seemed to gaze directly at the camera, at me across the vast gulf of time. That evening, I placed the photograph on my mantelpiece, intending to show it to my parents the following day. As darkness descended and shadows lengthened across my sitting room, I found myself unable to look away from those familiar eyes. In the flickering lamplight, they seemed to hold a terrible knowledge, as though Emily, or whatever wore her face in 1892, was attempting to communicate some dreadful truth that had been buried alongside generations of my family. Sleep eluded me that night as the photograph exerted a peculiar gravity, drawing my thoughts back to it whenever they wandered. By morning, with dawn's pale light seeping through my curtains, I had resolved to explore this impossible anomaly methodically. The family archives yielded little at first, brittle newspaper clippings and correspondence revealing only mundane details about the homestead depicted in the photograph. The property, known locally as Hawthorne Grange, had passed through maternal lineage since its construction in 1863. The family portrayed, my great-great-grandparents and their offspring, had lived unremarkable lives by all accounts, save for the youngest son, who perished from scarlet fever shortly after the photograph was taken. It was while examining parish records that I discovered the first troubling coincidence. Every third generation of my maternal line had experienced the unexplained disappearance of a female relative. In 1827, a young aunt vanished while collecting kindling in the wooded area behind the property. In 1939, my grandmother's sister went missing during a summer solstice celebration. And then, most recently, Emily. The timing formed a ghastly pattern, each disappearance occurring precisely 68 years apart. A chill suffused my being as I calculated from Emily's disappearance. 2075 would mark the next occurrence. Further investigation led me to the private journals of Augusta Thornfield, my great-great-grandmother, the matriarch in the photograph. Her penmanship, executed in faded violet ink, betrayed increasing agitation throughout the summer of 1892. She wrote of disturbances in the looking glass and the girl who watches from reflective surfaces. Most disturbing was her entry from the very day the photograph was taken. The photographer arranged us with professional efficiency, yet seemed disturbed by something beyond our assembly. After the exposure, he inquired most particularly about the young lady standing behind us. When we expressed confusion, his countenance grew ashen. He departed with undue haste, leaving his payment uncollected. Frederick believes the man was touched by lunacy or spirits. I remain unconvinced, for twice now I have glimpsed her from the corner of my eye, a girl with features not unlike my own kin, yet belonging to no one of my acquaintance. She observes us with terrible patience. During the subsequent weeks, Augusta's entries grew increasingly fraught. She described hearing girlish laughter emanating from unoccupied rooms and finding small feminine footprints in the dust of the sealed East Wing. Her final entry, dated September 19, 1892, consisted of a single sentence. She has begun to speak my name in the darkness. The journal abruptly ended there, though Augusta lived another 17 years, according to her headstone in the family cemetery. Whatever horrors she witnessed, after that September night, she committed none to paper. Or perhaps such records were deliberately destroyed. I returned to the photograph with renewed trepidation. In the intervening hours, subtle changes had manifested. The girl bearing Emily's countenance appeared to have shifted position slightly, one pale hand now distinctly visible on my great-grandfather's shoulder. A detail I would have sworn was absent the previous day. My hands quivered as I set the photograph down, retreating several paces, as though distance might protect me from its impossible transformation. The evening shadows stretched across my study like grasping fingers while I contemplated the photograph's aberration with mounting horror. I contacted Professor Eleanor Westcott the following morning, a distinguished academic whose specialty in Victorian photographic techniques had earned her international renown. Despite her busy schedule, the mention of a temporally impossible anomaly proved irresistible to her scholarly curiosity. She arrived at my cottage 3 days later, her silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a severe bun that accentuated her hawkish features and penetrating hazel eyes. Most manipulated photographs from that era display obvious technical inconsistencies, she explained, adjusting her wire-rimmed spectacles while examining the image under her magnifying loupe. Brushstrokes, negative scratches, double exposures, all leave distinctive artifacts. The professor's elegant fingers, adorned with a single antiquarian silver ring bearing a carnelian stone, traced the air above the photograph without touching its surface. "This defies conventional explanation," she murmured after nearly 30 minutes of meticulous scrutiny. "The tonality remains consistent throughout, the grain pattern uninterrupted. If this is a manipulation, it was executed with technical skill beyond what was possible in the 19th century. I hesitated before revealing my most disturbing observation. "The figure has moved since yesterday." Professor Westcott's expression remained professionally composed, though her posture stiffened perceptibly. "That would be quite impossible, Mr. Thornfield." "As impossible as my cousin appearing in an 1892 photograph," I countered, unable to keep a tremor from my voice. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Martha Cunningham, The local historical society's archivist appeared at my door, clutching a leather portfolio. Martha, a woman of 60-odd years with permanently pursed lips and the perpetual scent of mothballs clinging to her tweed ensemble, had been the keeper of the town's secrets for decades. Your inquiry about Hawthorne Grange led me to examine some recently donated materials, she announced without preamble. The previous township photographer's records were discovered in a wall cavity during renovations to the old studio. She extracted a brittle ledger, opening it to a marked page with hands gnarled by age, yet steady with purpose. The photographer who took your family portrait, Jeremiah Phelps, recorded something peculiar that day. The faded copperplate handwriting documented August 12, 1892. Family portrait at Hawthorne Grange. 5 subjects present, though the Thornfields claimed to be only 4. The 5th, a young woman of approximately 16 years, visible through the lens, yet unseen by the family. Most disturbing experience of my professional career. Martha's roomy gray eyes met mine with unexpected intensity. Jeremiah Phelps abandoned his practice shortly after this entry. He committed himself to Graymore Asylum within the month, where he remained until his death in 1953. The professor had gone utterly still, her academic skepticism visibly wavering. What did he claim drove him to such extremity? Martha's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. According to the asylum records, he insisted that the girl from the photograph visited him nightly, whispering that she was collecting what was promised. Most troubling was his insistence that her face changed slightly with each visitation, as though trying on different familial features. The 3 of us stood in frozen tableau as twilight descended, transforming my modest study into a chamber of elongated shadows and whispered possibilities. The photograph between us seemed to absorb what little illumination remained, the silver frame gleaming with unnatural luster despite the encroaching darkness. There exists in certain families, Professor Westcott ventured at last, her academic cadence unable to disguise a tremor of disquiet. Legends of ancestral pacts, arrangements made in moments of desperation that exact payment across generations. Martha nodded solemnly, the motion causing the antiquated brooch at her collar to catch what little light remained. The Thornfields were not prosperous before 1863. Then suddenly, inexplicably, their fortunes reversed. I felt a peculiar hollowness expand within my chest. You suggest my ancestors made some manner of bargain. One paid in blood and visages, Martha replied, her weathered fingers tracing the air above the photograph, without daring to touch its surface. The 3 disappearances occurred precisely 68 years apart, a number of significance in certain arcane traditions. 3 cycles of 22 plus 2 for the binding. As if summoned by our discourse, the electric lights flickered momentarily, then stabilized with an audible hum that seemed unnaturally loud in the tension, thick atmosphere. We should not continue this conversation in darkness, I murmured, reaching for the brass lamp upon my desk. As illumination bloomed, I noticed with mounting apprehension that a fine layer of condensation had formed upon the photograph's glass, resembling the delicate patterns of breath upon a mirror in winter. Professor Westcott withdrew a handkerchief from her pocket, moving to wipe away the mysterious moisture, but halted with her hand suspended mid-gesture. Look, she whispered. Within the clouded surface, finger marks appeared as though someone on the other side of the image was tracing patterns upon a fogged window. Slender, deliberate movements formed childish script that materialized before our collective gaze. I collect what was promised, the face before the soul. The words evaporated almost immediately, leaving no trace upon the now pristine glass. Martha clutched her heart, staggering backward until she collided with my bookcase, sending several volumes tumbling to the floor with dull, percussive thuds. "We must consult the Thornfield family Bible," she declared, her voice attaining a brittle quality I had never before detected. Such arrangements invariably leave their mark in familial records, often disguised as innocuous marginalia or coded passages. As she spoke, I became acutely aware of a subtle alteration in the atmosphere. A peculiar scent permeating the study, faint yet unmistakable. Lilacs and honey, the precise fragrance of the perfume Emily had worn on the day of her disappearance. "Do you smell that?" I inquired, my voice barely audible, even to my own ears. Neither woman responded verbally, though the widening of their eyes provided confirmation enough. The scent intensified with each passing moment, until it hung heavy in the air, cloying and inappropriate for the autumn season. Then came the sound, a gentle rhythmic tapping from within the walls, as though someone were counting with childish impatience. Tap, tap, tap. The cadence perfectly matched the ticking of the grandfather clock in my hallway, creating a dissonant counterpoint that raised the fine hairs along my forearms. The family Bible proved challenging to locate, sequestered in a cedar chest beneath layers of quilts in my grandmother's former bedroom. Its leather binding, cracked with age, released the scent of dust and devotion. As I carefully laid it upon my dining table, Professor Westcott and Martha flanked me as I delicately turned the brittle pages, past generations of births, marriages, and deaths meticulously recorded in varying hands. There Martha indicated, her finger hovering above a peculiar annotation in the margin beside Genesis. The cramped script differed from the genealogical entries, smaller, more urgent, the ink a rusty brown that bore unsettling similarity to dried blood. Covenant established beneath the crooked elm when the heavens aligned. 3 and 3 and 3 shall be rendered unto the collector, the face before the soul, the visage before the vessel. May God forgive what necessity has wrought. The date inscribed beneath June 21st, 1863, the summer solstice, precisely the same day my grandmother's sister would vanish 76 years later. This corresponds with the sudden change in Thornfield fortunes. Professor Westcott observed, her academic detachment fraying at the edges. What desperate circumstance would drive someone to such arrangements? I turned additional pages, discovering a folded slip of parchment tucked between Lamentations and Ezekiel. Upon unfolding it, we discovered a crude drawing of a feminine figure with a blank oval, where the face should have been. Beneath it, the same hand had written, "She wears each face for 22 years before requiring another." The contract sustains until the 9th collection. Then she becomes permanent. Martha's complexion paled to alabaster. 8 faces already claimed across generations, with Emily being the most recent. 1 more collection would complete the covenant. And that would fall to my generation to provide. I whispered, a terrible understanding dawning. My fingers trembled as I counted forward from the first recorded disappearance. The 9th would be in 2075. Your daughter, Professor Westcott said quietly. Or granddaughter. The photograph on the mantel suddenly crashed to the floor, the glass shattering across the hardwood. We rushed to where it lay, and I carefully extracted the image from among the fragments. The alteration was undeniable. Emily's features had shifted subtly, her eyes now positioned fractionally closer together, her lips fuller, her cheekbones higher. She's changing, I breathed, adapting her appearance. From upstairs came the unmistakable sound of my attic door swinging open, its distinctive creak, having haunted my childhood visits to grandmother's home. Footsteps light, precise, deliberate, descended the stairs, though no figure appeared in the doorway. "The 9th shall be the last," came a voice that combined Emily's familiar timbre with something ancient and hollow, but not as you imagine. The footsteps continued their approach, still without visible presence, stopping mere feet from where we stood paralyzed. A cold breath caressed my cheek as the voice whispered directly into my ear. Family resemblance is such a curious thing. You have your great-great-grandfather's eyes. The revelation struck me with physical force, propelling me backward until the edge of the dining table arrested my retreat. The collector, this entity wearing Emily's face, had not randomly selected its victims across generations. It had chosen with deliberate precision, following bloodlines like a cartographer traces tributaries to their source. The original covenant, I managed through a throat constricted by dread. Who signed it? A disembodied laugh rippled through the room, causing the fragments of broken glass to vibrate minutely across the floorboards. The temperature plummeted until our breath materialized before us in pale ephemeral clouds. Jeremiah Phelps was not merely your family's photographer. The voice continued, ignoring my question with casual cruelty. He was your great-grandfather's illegitimate half, brother, unacknowledged, unnamed in family records, but sharing the blood that binds our arrangement. Professor Westcott's scholarly composure crumbled entirely as a teacup from the sideboard suddenly levitated, then shattered against the wall. Her hand clutched Martha's forearm with white, knuckled intensity. The photographer recognized me. The voice continued, now emanating from behind the shattered frame. Not from memory, but from blood, the same way you recognized your cousin in a century-old photograph. Blood calls to blood across the veil. The air before us shimmered like heat above summer asphalt, coalescing gradually into a translucent approximation of human form. Features assembled themselves piecemeal, Emily's eyes, but surrounded by skin possessing the weathered texture of ancient parchment. Lips that belonged to my grandmother in her youth. A jaw with the distinctive angle present in every Thornfield male for generations. The 9th collection completes the circle, it explained, its voice now emanating from the half-formed mouth of the apparition. When I have worn 9 faces, I require no more. Instead, I return to claim the bloodline that imprisoned me. Martha's historical knowledge surfaced through her terror. The summer of 1863, the Great Drought. Crops failed throughout the region. Your ancestor did not sacrifice for prosperity, the entity corrected, the amalgamated features of its face rearranging into an expression of terrible amusement. He sacrificed for survival. His children were starving, his wife dying. The covenant was struck not from greed but desperation. A book flew from my shelf, landing open before us on the table. Its pages rifled violently until stopping at a woodcut illustration of a creature half-woman, half-shadow, standing beside a gnarled tree. The text beneath identified it as a face-taker, a folkloric entity that granted boons in exchange for identities. I've worn 8 faces since that desperate bargain. The apparition continued, its form solidifying further with each word. 8 souls whose features I've borrowed, while their essence remains suspended. The 9th shall complete my collection, but rather than taking another descendant, I shall claim you, the last direct heir of he who bound me. The implications crashed upon me with devastating clarity. I was not investigating a family mystery. I was fulfilling a generational prophecy. The collector had been guiding events across centuries toward this precise moment, this final confrontation. And what becomes of those whose faces you've taken? I whispered, though I dreaded the answer. The entity's mouth stretched into a smile too wide for human anatomy. Why not ask them yourself? They've been waiting to meet you in the place between reflections. I placed my palm against the smooth surface of the hallway mirror, a desperate gamble born of terrible understanding. The glass yielded like disturbed water, cool and viscous against my skin. Before Professor Westcott or Martha could utter a word of caution, I stepped through the mercurial boundary drawn by ancestral obligation. The realm beyond defied rational description, a liminal space where architecture obeyed no natural laws. Corridors stretched and compressed simultaneously. Chambers revealed themselves as both cavernous and claustrophobic. Most disturbing were the windows that punctuated these impossible walls. Not apertures to any exterior, but portals into moments across time, displaying tableaux of my family's history like macabre dioramas. Through one such window, I witnessed the drought of 1863 in merciless detail. The parched earth of Hawthorne Grange had cracked like ancient pottery, crops withering beneath a merciless sun. My ancestor, Josiah Thornfield, knelt beside the family well, the bucket he'd drawn up containing nothing but mud and despair. His children, hollow-cheeked and listless, watched from the porch steps, their eyes sunken with hunger. Another window revealed the ritual itself. The crooked elm stood tall, then, its gnarled branches casting spidery shadows across Josiah's desperate countenance. The folkloric texts had omitted crucial details: the obsidian knife, the silver bowl collecting his blood, the circle of river stones arranged in patterns resembling constellations long forgotten by modern astronomy. The Pleiades conjunction occurs, but once each century, spoke a female voice behind me. I turned to find a young woman in Victorian mourning attire, her features hauntingly familiar. The disappeared aunt from 1827, Agnes Thornfield, according to parish records. Though her clothing belonged to the 19th century, her eyes carried the wariness of nearly 2 centuries of imprisonment. When the 7 sisters align with the harvest moon during drought, the veil thins. She continued, her voice carrying the peculiar cadence of a bygone era. Josiah had consulted a tome from the Old World, Grimorium Verum et Falsum, believing he found a ritual to summon benevolent spirits of abundance, but he called forth the collector instead. I concluded. Agnes nodded solemnly. The entity was once human in epochs long past, a village outcast accused of witchcraft in the early 1600s. She was subjected to the water test in the pond that would eventually become part of Thornfield land. As she drowned, she pledged vengeance upon whoever would claim her resting place. The windows rippled, displaying new scenes. Generations of Thornfield prosperity built upon the foundation of that terrible bargain. The family's rise from desperate farmers to landed gentry, the establishment of agricultural innovations that survived even the Dust Bowl, the shrewd investments that transformed agricultural wealth into industrial fortune. "We are not prisoners," came another voice, my grandmother's sister, Catherine in the clothing of 1939. "We are collectors ourselves, gathering memories, maintaining the balance. Without us, she would have consumed your entire lineage generations ago." "The 9th collection doesn't complete her covenant," Agnes explained, her expression grave. "It breaches it. The final face grants her passage into your world permanently, untethered from reflective surfaces or temporal constraints." Catherine approached, her hand cool against my cheek. "You must find the original grimoire." Josiah hid it where shadow meets light, but neither prevails. "The equinox approaches," Agnes warned. "When day and night achieve perfect balance, she will make her final collection. You must locate the book before then." I emerged from the mirror with newfound determination, my body passing through the silvery threshold as though stepping through a membrane between worlds. The experience left a peculiar residue on my skin. Not physical moisture, but the sensation of having been submerged in ancient memories. Professor Westcott and Martha gaped as I materialized before them, their expression suggesting I had been absent far longer than the few minutes I had perceived. "The equinox," I gasped, my voice sounding foreign to my ears, as though the liminal space had altered its very timbre. "We have until the autumnal equinox to locate Josiah's grimoire." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, each resonant chime seeming to compress the air around us. By my calculation, we had precisely 3 days remaining before the perfect balance of light and darkness would enable the collector's final transformation. Shadow meets light, but neither prevails, Professor Westcott repeated, her academic mind already analyzing the riddle. A place of perpetual twilight within Hawthorne Grange. Martha's eyes widened with sudden recognition. The dumbwaiter shaft that runs between the eastern and western wings. It resides in the central wall that divides the morning and afternoon sun, a vertical tunnel, untouched by direct light at any hour. The journey to Hawthorne Grange that night was fraught with uncanny incidents. Our motorcar's electrical system faltered repeatedly, the headlamps dimming to near darkness, before resurging with blinding intensity. The navigation system directed us along increasingly obscure country lanes until Martha, relying on decades-old memory, recognized we were being deliberately misdirected away from our destination. The Grange loomed against the star-strewn sky like a woodcut illustration from a Victorian ghost story, its gables and chimney stacks forming a jagged silhouette against the waning moon. Though uninhabited since my grandmother's passing, lamplight flickered behind several upper-story windows, suggesting impossible occupation. She's aware of our intentions, I murmured as we approached the weathered front door, its brass fittings tarnished green with verdigris. The key turned with reluctant protest, the mechanism within grinding as though filled with decades of accumulated grit. The foyer beyond existed in a state of temporal uncertainty. Certain elements precisely as my grandmother had left them, while others displayed evidence of recent disturbance. A layer of dust coated the parquet flooring, yet clear footprints, small and delicate, like those of a young woman, traversed the hallway and ascended the main staircase. The house exhaled around us, the subtle shifting of ancient timber and plaster, creating an acoustical illusion of respiration. From the walls, generations of Thornfield ancestors observed our intrusion through painted eyes that seemed to track our movements with proprietary disapproval. We located the dumbwaiter in the central corridor, its ornate wooden hatch sealed with a rusted padlock that disintegrated at my touch, crumbling into ferrous powder that scattered across the floorboards like malevolent spice. The vertical shaft beyond existed in perfect equilibrium between darkness and illumination, a twilight zone untouched by direct sunlight or complete shadow at any hour of day. Professor Westcott produced a slender flashlight from her satchel, its beam revealing the shaft's rough stone interior. Approximately 8 feet down, a small alcove had been carved into the masonry, a hiding place designed to be invisible from either the upper or lower access points. Within this recess rested a package wrapped in oilcloth and bound with twine that had petrified into wooden rigidity over the intervening centuries. The grimoire emerged from its centuries-old hibernation with palpable reluctance. As I unwrapped the oilcloth binding, fragments flaked away like desiccated autumn leaves. The book itself possessed an unnerving quality. Its leather cover had not been crafted from cattle hide, but something far more unsettling. The pebbled texture and irregular patterning suggested human dermis tanned and stretched across the binding with meticulous care. Anthropodermic bibliophagy, Professor Westcott whispered, her academic detachment momentarily reasserting itself. The practice of binding books in human skin was uncommon but documented through the 17th century, particularly for texts dealing with mortality or forbidden knowledge. The pages within bore the spidery rust-colored calligraphy of a man descending into obsession. Josiah's handwriting transformed across the journal, beginning with the measured penmanship of an educated gentleman farmer and deteriorating into the feverish scrawl of someone balanced on the precipice of madness. alchemical symbols intermingled with astronomical calculations and fragments of Latin incantations, creating a disjointed narrative of desperation. Here, Martha indicated, her trembling finger hovering above a page dated June 20th, 1863. The day before the solstice ritual, he describes the collector's weakness. I squinted at the cramped text, translating aloud. The entity remains tethered to reflective surfaces until the ninth visage is claimed. When the face-taker appears physically, she must be confronted with the unified gaze of all prior collections. Only the combined will of those whose identities she has absorbed may force her return to the liminal realm. A sudden draft extinguished our flashlight, plunging the narrow corridor into darkness, broken only by moonlight filtering through a distant window. The temperature plummeted until our exhalations materialized as ephemeral phantoms in the gloom. How precisely does one gather 8 stolen faces spanning 2 centuries? Professor Westcott inquired, her voice admirably steady despite the tremor in her hands as she attempted to reignite the flashlight. The answer manifested before I could respond. Every mirror and reflective surface throughout the ancient house, from ornate Victorian-looking glasses to the polished silver candlesticks adorning the mantelpiece, simultaneously erupted with cold blue, white illumination. The light pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat, growing progressively more intense with each throb. The mirrors I breathed understanding, coalescing like frost crystals upon glass. They're responding to the grimoire's presence. We proceeded toward the grand mirror in the entrance hall, an imposing piece of Victorian craftsmanship that stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, its mahogany frame carved with intricate motifs of vines and partially obscured faces. As we approached, the glass rippled like disturbed water, its surface becoming translucent rather than reflective. Through this mercurial portal, 8 figures gradually assembled, my family's missing women arranged in chronological order of their disappearance. Their forms possessed a watercolor quality, edges bleeding into one another, yet maintaining distinct identities. They raised their hands in perfect synchronicity, palms pressed against the membrane separating our worlds. The convergence approaches. They spoke in unsettling chorus, their voices overlapping like discordant music. We have maintained our consciousness within her collection, preserving our identities against her consumption. When she manifests to claim the 9th, you must lead her to the Thornfield Cemetery at the precise moment of equinox. The cemetery at Hawthorne Grange occupied the property's northeastern corner, where ancient yew trees cast perpetual shadow across generations of Thornfield markers. As we traversed the overgrown path leading to this ancestral resting place, I clutched the grimoire against my chest, its unnatural warmth seeping through my clothing despite the autumn chill. The equinoctial alignment will occur at precisely 16 minutes past 7 tomorrow evening, Professor Westcott informed us. Consulting astronomical tables she had hastily printed before our departure, the moment when light and darkness achieve perfect equilibrium across the globe. Martha had fallen silent, her usually loquacious nature subdued by the weight of our undertaking. She moved with uncharacteristic caution, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line, as though expecting the collector to materialize from the gathering dusk. The family plot was surrounded by a wrought iron fence whose intricate design incorporated reflective glass cabocons at each intersection, hundreds of tiny mirrors creating a barrier that was both physical and metaphysical. The gate protested with metallic lamentation as I pushed it open, revealing rows of headstones arranged in concentric circles around a central monument. This centerpiece proved most curious indeed, an obelisk of polished obsidian, its surfaces offering distorted reflections from every angle. Etched into its base were words nearly worn away by centuries of exposure. What was taken shall be returned when shadows balance light. The focal point? I murmured, running my fingers across the ancient inscription. This monument marks the exact spot where Josiah performed the original ritual. Professor Westcott extracted a brass compass from her satchel, confirming what I had already suspected. The obelisk stands at perfect true north orientation, a deliberate placement for maximum celestial alignment. Upon closer examination, the cemetery revealed additional peculiarities. Each Thornfield grave marker contained a small inset mirror, most now tarnished or broken, yet still possessing reflective properties. More telling were the 8 empty plots, graves dug but never filled, corresponding precisely to the 8 women who had been claimed across generations. They were never truly missing, Martha whispered, comprehension dawning in her rheumy eyes. Their physical forms were transmogrified, absorbed into the collector's liminal existence. As twilight deepened toward night, I noticed something extraordinary occurring within the obsidian obelisk. Deep within its polished surface, ghostly images began to coalesce, faces forming and dissolving like dreams upon waking. I recognized Emily's features briefly before they melted into those of Catherine, then Agnon's, then others unfamiliar yet bearing unmistakable Thornfield characteristics. The collector grows restless, Professor Westcott observed, her scholarly demeanor unable to conceal mounting apprehension. The approaching equinox strengthens her connection to our realm. From within my coat pocket, the photograph that had initiated this ghastly investigation emitted a sudden, piercing cold, so intense that frost formed upon the fabric surrounding it. When I withdrew the image, Emily's face had vanished entirely from the figure standing behind my ancestors, leaving only a blank oval of unexposed emulsion surrounded by sepia darkness. "She comes," I whispered. As the empty graves began to fill with silvery light, the cemetery's transformation occurred in eerie silence, as though the very air held its breath in anticipation. Each empty grave now brimmed with quicksilver luminescence. The light neither warm nor cool, but somehow both simultaneously, a paradoxical radiance that defied natural law. The light coalesced into vertical columns, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water, each containing the shadowy silhouette of a woman. Behind us, the iron gate closed of its own accord, the latch engaging with a decisive click that echoed through the hallowed grounds. The tiny mirrors adorning the fence began to rotate independently, adjusting their angles until each reflected the obsidian obelisk at the cemetery center. Hundreds of miniature light beams converged upon the monument, causing its polished surface to pulsate with increasing luminosity. From my satchel, I retrieved the grimoire, its cover now warm to the touch, as though infused with fevered anticipation. The pages fluttered open without human intervention, stopping at an illustration I had overlooked during our initial examination, a detailed rendering of Hawthorne Grange's grounds with the cemetery depicted as a vast sigil. When viewed from above, the entire burial ground forms a summoning circle. Professor Westcott breathed, comprehension dawning across her features. The generations of Thornfield interments were positioned deliberately to create a pattern visible only from celestial height, a beacon to guide the collector back to her originating point. From the bottommost drawer of the obelisk's granite base emerged a previously concealed compartment, revealing a tarnished silver hand mirror. Its handle bore the Thornfield family crest interwoven with symbols corresponding to those in Josiah's grimoire. A parchment scrap accompanied this artifact, the handwriting matching Josiah's earliest entries, before desperation had corrupted his penmanship. "To my descendants, who must complete what I have begun, the collector was once maligned graves, falsely drowned as witch upon these lands in 1623. Her mortal remains lie directly beneath this monument, intermingled with sacred soil from 7 consecrated grounds. The mirror I crafted from silver mined by moonlight contains her final reflection, captured at the moment of her drowning. When held before her manifested form during perfect equilibrium of light and shadow, it shall reveal her true visage, not the assembled faces of her victims, but her original countenance. Confronted with her genuine identity, her power to collect shall dissolve, freeing those already taken. May Providence guide your hand where mine has failed. Josiah Thornfield, June 20th, 1863. As I lifted the mirror, its surface remained peculiarly empty, reflecting neither my face nor the cemetery surroundings. Instead, it displayed only swirling mist, as though the glass itself contained captured fog. The obsidian obelisk began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading across its polished surface, like a frozen pond giving way beneath too much weight. From within these fissures emerged not stone dust, but tendrils of iridescent vapor that coiled and twisted with serpentine purpose, gradually assembling into humanoid form. The collector was manifesting not through mirrors or photographs, but physically entering our world through the monument that had both imprisoned and sustained her for centuries. As her form solidified before us, I glimpsed not Emily's features, nor any of the other taken women, but something far more ancient and terrible, a countenance composed of shadows and negative space, defined not by what was present, but by what was absent. The manifestation reached completion as the 8 silvery columns from the empty graves began to flow toward the shattered obelisk, merging with the entity like tributaries joining a river. With each absorption, her form gained definition, fingers extending into elongated digits that ended in points too sharp for human anatomy, a torso that undulated between feminine curves and skeletal angularity, and a face that remained devoid of swirling darkness. "Hold fast to the mirror," Martha whispered urgently, her voice barely audible above the rising wind that now circled the cemetery. "When the equinox alignment reaches perfection, you must capture her reflection." The collector spoke then, her voice a dissonant harmony of all 8 taken women, their individual timbres layered upon one another like a nightmarish choir. The 9th phase completes what was begun when Josiah Thornfield spilled his blood upon my resting place. She intuned, extending a vapor like arm toward me. "His bloodline ends with you, last son of a covenant, bound lineage." The sky above Hawthorne Grange had transformed entirely, no longer displaying the expected constellations of autumn, but instead revealing an astronomical impossibility. Stars arranged in patterns documented in Josiah's grimoire. The Pleiades hung directly overhead, 7 points of cold fire that cast an unearthly illumination across the cemetery grounds. Professor Westcott consulted her timepiece with trembling hands. 13 minutes until perfect alignment, she announced, her scholarly composure crumbling beneath the weight of witnessing physical laws unraveling around us. The collector drifted forward, her movement neither walking nor floating, but something unnaturally between. The temperature plummeted wherever her form passed, frost blooming across headstones in crystalline patterns that resembled faces in silent scream. The iron fence surrounding the cemetery began to corrode at accelerated speed, rust-consuming metal as decades of decay compressed into moments. "Your ancestors understood the price of survival," she continued, her voice modulating between whisper and wail. 8 faces freely given across generations. "The 9th, yours, shall grant me permanent passage." I clutched the silver mirror with white, knuckled determination, its surface still reflecting only swirling mist, rather than our surroundings. The grimoire's pages turned violently in my other hand, finally settling on an illustration of a ritual circle identical to the cemetery's layout when viewed from above. "The 9th was never meant to be claimed," I countered, recalling Agnes's words from the liminal realm. The covenant was designed to sustain you until the final collection could free those already taken. The collector paused, her formless visage tilting as though in contemplation. From the void where a face should have been, came a sound like shattering glass, her approximation of laughter. Josiah's desperate deception, she hissed with venomous amusement. He believed he could undo our bargain through careful planning and esoteric knowledge. Yet each generation has strengthened my claim through blood and bone and memory. The cemetery grounds trembled beneath our feet as ancient roots burst through soil, twisting upward like gnarled hands reaching for deliverance. The equinox approached its perfect balance, and with it the culmination of a contract spanning 2 centuries of thornfield sacrifice. The obsidian obelisk now stood completely fractured, its polished surface reduced to a constellation of jagged shards that reflected the impossible stars above. Each fragment caught and multiplied the celestial light, creating a kaleidoscope of illumination that danced across the cemetery grounds with hypnotic intensity. The effect produced shadows that moved contrary to natural law, elongating when light strengthened, receding when darkness encroached. My breath emerged in crystallized clouds as the temperature continued its precipitous descent. The collector's presence had transmuted the autumn evening into deepest winter, frost patterns blooming across my skin wherever it remained exposed to the unnatural air. Each inhalation felt like swallowing powdered glass, the cold burning through my respiratory system. With clinical cruelty, the silver mirror in my grasp had begun to vibrate with subtle, yet unmistakable purpose, as though the artifact itself anticipated the approaching celestial alignment. Its previously empty surface now displayed faint ripples of luminescence that corresponded precisely with the pulsations emanating from the collector's void, like countenance. The connection between reflective tool and spectral entity grew more pronounced with each passing moment, the mirror seemingly awakening after centuries of dormancy. Professor Westcott's voice had acquired the brittle quality of one clinging to rational thought while witnessing its foundations disintegrate. 7 minutes until perfect equilibrium, she announced, her words visible as ephemeral ghosts that dissipated into the unnatural atmosphere. Martha had fallen to her knees, her lips moving in silent prayer or perhaps incantation. The distinction between religious supplication and arcane practice having grown meaningless in the face of such manifest impossibility. The grimoire pages continued their autonomous turning, ancient parchment rustling with sentient intent, as though the book itself sought specific knowledge for this culminating moment. From the empty graves, tendrils of quicksilver illumination continued to stream toward the collector, each luminous ribbon containing fragmentary images of the women whose identities she had absorbed across generations. Fleeting expressions of terror, resignation, and most disturbingly, serenity flashed across these ephemeral conduits, suggesting the complexity of their captivity within her liminal prison. The yew trees surrounding the cemetery had begun to exude a viscous amber resin that dripped from their branches like posthumous tears, the substance igniting spontaneously where it touched the frost-covered ground. These tiny conflagrations created a boundary of flickering illumination that intensified the otherworldly tableau within. My consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of my physical form, perceiving the interlocking patterns of ritual and consequence that had bound my lineage to this spectral collector. Each Thornfield generation had carried this burden unknowingly, their lives circumscribed by a covenant written in desperation and blood. The weight of this ancestral obligation pressed upon my psyche with crushing intensity, yet paradoxically imbued me with clarity of purpose, transcending mere self-preservation. As the collector drifted closer, The void where her face should have been began to coalesce into recognizable features. Not Emily's, nor any of the previously taken women, but something both ancient and nascent. The countenance forming before us belonged to malign Graves, her expression caught in that liminal moment between life and drowning, between accusation and vengeance. 3 minutes. Professor Westcott whispered, her academic demeanor entirely subsumed by primal dread. The obsidian fragment in my pocket, recovered from the shattered obelisk moments before, pulsed with glacial cold against my flesh. As the collector's manifestation neared completion, the equinox convergence approached its zenith, and I observed with scholarly detachment belying my terror how the cemetery had transformed into a perfect astronomical instrument. Each headstone now cast shadows that pointed precisely toward the center, where Malign's partially formed visage hovered, her features shifting between recognizable humanity and something altogether more primordial. The 9th collection inverts the covenant, Martha whispered, her arthritic fingers clasping a small hand mirror she had extracted from her handbag. A family heirloom, I realized, bearing the same arcane engravings as my own. When multiple reflective surfaces capture her simultaneously, her essence divides. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. The Thornfield burials had never been mere interments, but components of an elaborate mechanism designed across generations. Each grave marker, with its inset mirror, formed part of a vast optical apparatus that would activate only during this specific celestial alignment. The grimoire revealed its final secret as I turned to the last page, previously sealed with wax bearing Josiah's signet. The Latin text written in a steadier hand than his fevered previous entries detailed the ritual's true purpose. Not to banish Meline to some otherworldly realm, but to fracture her consciousness into 9 separate vessels, thereby diminishing her power until a future generation could permanently resolve the haunting. Professor Westcott positioned herself at the northwestern corner of the cemetery, raising her antique compact mirror with scholarly precision. Refraction requires multiple points of capture, she called, her voice carrying an authority that transcended her physical frailty. The collector sensed our intention, her near, complete form undulating with newfound urgency. The void where her face should have been now flickered rapidly between the visages of all 8 women. Taken across generations, their expressions contorted in silent warning or encouragement. I could not determine which. The 9th vessel stands empty, the collector hissed, gesturing toward the freshly disturbed earth, before my grandfather's headstone, a grave prepared but never occupied. Your physical form shall house my essence, while your consciousness joins the collection. From the twisted yew branches emerged Emily's spectral figure, her ethereal hand extending toward me across the boundary between worlds. The 9th must be freely given, she intoned, her voice carrying the harmonic resonance of all 8 captured women, as was promised in the original covenant. The astronomical alignment reached its perfect equilibrium, and I raised the silver mirror toward the collector's manifesting countenance. In that suspended moment between breaths, I glimpsed Maline's original face reflected not in the glass before me, but in the obsidian fragment against my heart, her expression not vengeful, but beseeching, trapped between dimensions, neither living nor dead. The mercury, like substance comprising her form, began to spiral toward the 9 reflective surfaces, now positioned around the cemetery perimeter, her unified consciousness fragmenting, visibly as tendrils of her essence stretched toward each mirror. The night itself seemed to hold its breath as 2 centuries of arcane obligation reached its culmination beneath the perfect balance of autumnal stars. The culmination unfolded in a spectacle of impossible physics and ancestral reckoning. as 9 mirrors captured Maline's fragmenting essence. The cemetery transformed into a prismatic chamber of light and shadow. Each reflective surface hummed with increasing resonance, the vibration traveling through soil and stone, until the very ground beneath our feet sang with eldritch harmonics. The sound resembled no earthly instrument, rather the crystalline keening of reality itself, under tremendous strain. I stood transfixed at the vortex of this metaphysical maelstrom, the silver mirror burning cold in my grasp, as it hungrily drew in quicksilver tendrils of the collector's essence. The obsidian fragment against my heart had begun to dissolve, its ancient substance transmuting into a viscous ichor that seeped through fabric to inscribe arcane patterns upon my skin. Each symbol burned with frozen fire, forming a lattice of protection and containment across my flesh. The collector's ninefold division had initiated, but something unforeseen was occurring. Rather than merely fragmenting between mirrors as Josiah had intended, her consciousness appeared to be unraveling entirely, the weave of her composite being separating into constituent threads of memory, identity, and primal essence. The faces of my taken ancestors flashed across her disintegrating form with increasing rapidity, their expressions transforming from terror to realization to resolute purpose. "The covenant demands conclusion," whispered Emily's voice. Though her spectral form had dissolved into the greater working, not division, but restoration, Professor Westcott cried out from her position at the northwestern corner, her academic reserve shattered by revelation. The grimoire missiled us. "This isn't fragmentation, it's reconstitution." Indeed, the silvery substance comprising Maline's form was not diminishing, but reorganizing, flowing not only into the mirrors, but through them. Behind each reflective surface appeared a shimmering silhouette, each taken woman manifesting with increasing solidity, their features resolving from ethereal luminescence to corporeal definition with each passing moment. The night sky above shifted dramatically, stars wheeling in impossible arcs as the equinoctial balance extended beyond its natural duration. The cosmos itself seemed to accommodate this work of generational rectification, granting the necessary moments for centuries, old wrong to find resolution. Martha had collapsed in sympathetic exhaustion, her elderly frame unable to withstand the metaphysical demands of the ritual. Yet her mirror remained suspended in midair, maintained by forces transcending physical law. From her parted lips emerged not her voice, but a chorus of female voices spanning centuries. What was taken shall be returned. What was divided shall be made whole. The ground beneath the obsidian obelisk's shattered remains began to subside, forming a perfect circular depression approximately 6 feet in diameter. From this nadir emerged skeletal remains, not decayed as one would expect after 4 centuries, but pristinely preserved, the bones gleaming with the same mercurial luminescence that comprised the collector's form. Malign graves, the original woman, the falsely accused, the vengeful spirit transformed into collector of faces, was reclaiming her mortal vessel. As the final stage in this generational covenant, her consciousness, fragmented across mirrors and centuries, was converging upon her physical remains with inexorable purpose. The air above her reconstituting skeleton shimmered with potentiality, the boundary between worlds grown so thin that realms bled into one another, like watercolors on dampened paper. The mercurial essence of malign graves continued its inexorable convergence upon her ancient remains, each sinuous tendril carrying fragments of identity, both hers and those she had claimed across generations. As her skeletal form gradually knit itself together with luminous filaments, I witnessed a transformation that defied natural law, yet adhered to some higher cosmic principle of restoration. My ancestors began materializing fully now, stepping through their respective mirrors as though crossing thresholds between dimensions. Agnes emerged first, her Victorian morning attire rustling with newfound solidity. Catherine followed, the fashionable clothing of 1939 appearing startlingly vibrant against the cemetery's monochromatic backdrop. One by one they crossed over. Elizabeth, Victoria, Constance, Imogen, Sophia, each woman bearing the distinctive Thornfield countenance, yet marked by the era from which she had been taken. Emily appeared last, her familiar features causing my heart to constrict with both joy and trepidation. She approached with cautious steps, adjusting to corporeal existence after years in the liminal realm. The 9th was never meant to be a taking, she explained, her voice resonating with the acquired wisdom of her captivity. The covenant required 9 reflections to complete the circle of restoration. 8 reclaimed and 1 returned. Above Malign's reconstituting form, the void that had been her collector's visage began to collapse inward, dimensions folding upon themselves like origami crafted by invisible hands. The temperature surrounding this metaphysical implosion rose rapidly, frost retreating from headstones as ancient cold transmuted to vital warmth. The grimoire in my possession underwent its final transformation, its pages turning to dust that spiraled upward to join the greater working. 4 centuries of accumulated knowledge, desperation, and arcane practice dissolved into the greater working, the book fulfilling its ultimate purpose through self-annihilation. Josiah's redemption, Martha whispered, having regained consciousness enough to witness the culmination. His covenant was not merely for survival, but atonement for the original sin against malign. The quicksilver luminescence intensified to blinding brilliance, forcing us to shield our eyes. When vision returned moments later, a woman stood where Malign's skeletal remains had been. Neither the vengeful collector nor the accused witch, but something reconciled between these extremes. Her countenance bore the serenity of one who had traversed the ultimate liminality and returned with profound comprehension. She raised her newly materialized hands, studying them with expression cycling between wonder and remembrance. When she spoke, her voice carried the resonance of water flowing over ancient stones. 4 centuries of fragmentation ends, she declared. The Thornfield bloodline has fulfilled its obligation. What was taken in desperation has been restored through persistence. The obsidian fragment against my heart had completely dissolved, leaving an intricate pattern etched upon my skin, not a brand of ownership, but a sigil of completion. The cosmic alignment above began to normalize, stars returning to their proper autumnal positions as the extended equinox concluded its supernatural accommodation. Emily approached me with tentative steps, her hand reaching toward mine with the hesitancy of one uncertain whether human contact remained possible. When our fingers touched, the warmth of her newly restored physicality confirmed what seemed impossible moments before. She had truly returned from the collector's realm, no longer a spectral approximation, but fully corporeal. The 9th face was always meant to be Malign's own, she whispered as the cemetery grounds settled into a tranquility unknown for centuries. The journal remained upon my desk, where I had left it, its weathered pages still open to the final entry I had inscribed 3 months prior. Dust had gathered along its leather binding, a gossamer veil marking the passage of time since the night of restoration. Outside my study window, winter had relinquished its grip on Hawthorne Grange, allowing the first tentative crocuses to emerge from soil that had known only frost and shadow during the equinoctial working. The 8 women had integrated back into existence with varying degrees of adaptation. Agnes, having been absent from corporeal reality for the longest duration, frequently paused mid-conversation to marvel at electrical illumination or the sound of rainfall against glass. Catherine had taken to modern clothing with surprising enthusiasm, though she maintained her 1930s hairstyle with meticulous precision. Emily had resumed her doctoral studies in medieval literature, her thesis now informed by first-hand experience of liminal consciousness that she could never explicitly reference in academic circles. Professor Westcott had documented the entire ordeal in a private manuscript that would remain sealed in university archives for 100 years. Martha had succumbed to cardiac complications 2 weeks after the cemetery working, though her serene expression at her passing suggested she considered her role in the restoration a culminating achievement worthy of peaceful departure. Most remarkable was Malign herself. After 4 centuries of fractured existence, first as the wrongfully drowned accused, then as the vengeful collector, she now occupied a cottage at the edge of the Thornfield property. Her reintegration into temporal reality had required considerable documentation finesse, with Professor Westcott's academic connections providing a carefully constructed identity. She spent her days tending a garden of medicinal herbs, the very plants for which she had originally been accused of witchcraft, now growing under her care without fear of persecution. The Thornfield Cemetery had transformed following that night of metaphysical reconfiguration. The previously empty graves had filled with loamy soil of extraordinary fertility from which grew 9 white roses of a variety botanists could not identify. The iron fence had regenerated its corroded sections, the tiny mirrors now reflecting only natural light, rather than serving as portals between worlds. The obsidian obelisk had reconstituted itself into a smooth column of pure black stone, its surface no longer reflective but absorptive, drawing in light rather than returning it. I traced the silvery pattern upon my chest, where the obsidian fragment had dissolved into my skin. The marking had neither faded nor diminished in the intervening months, its intricate whorls and angles occasionally shifting position when observed in peripheral vision. Physicians found nothing medically concerning in the phenomenon, their instruments registering normal tissue beneath seemingly impossible pigmentation. The silver mirror remained in my possession, though its surface now reflected with perfect normality. I had contemplated destroying it, but ultimately recognized its importance as tangible evidence of our extraordinary experience. It resided now in a locked cabinet alongside the single surviving page from Josiah's grimoire, a sheet that had separated from the dissolving tome and drifted to rest against a headstone. Upon it, in steady handwriting, so unlike his fevered scrawl, were inscribed the words, "Restoration requires recognition of mutual humanity across the veil." Within the still evening air, I found myself drawn repeatedly to the window overlooking the now transformed grounds of Hawthorne Grange. The 9 white roses had flourished beyond botanical expectation, their blooms possessing a luminosity visible even in deepest twilight. More curious still, they followed no natural cycle of growth and decay, remaining perpetually in perfect bloom regardless of season or climate. Local folklore had already begun to attribute healing properties to their petals, though none dared harvest them without explicit permission. The restoration had rippled outward beyond our immediate circle, affecting the surrounding community in subtle, yet unmistakable ways. Historical records in the township archives had spontaneously amended themselves. The account of Malign's drowning now, accompanied by notations of witness, recantations, and posthumous exoneration. Descendants of her accusers reported unusually vivid dreams in which ancestors appeared seeking forgiveness. The pond where she had met her fate, long considered ecologically dead from industrial contamination, now supported abundant aquatic life, its waters possessing a clarity not seen in centuries. Most profound were the changes within my own consciousness. The barrier between past and present had grown permeable in my perception. allowing occasional glimpses of prior Thornfield generations going about their daily lives within these same halls. These visions arrived without warning, a 19th-century child momentarily visible, ascending the main staircase, or the fleeting impression of Josiah himself standing in contemplation before the library hearth. These manifestations carried no spectral malevolence, but rather the comforting continuity of familial presence across temporal boundaries. Malign had explained this phenomenon during one of our evening conversations on her cottage porch. Time is not the linear progression your modern mind perceives, she had said, her fingers working methodically at her embroidery, an art she had reclaimed from her first life. It resembles more closely a tapestry viewed from above, where all moments exist simultaneously, merely experienced sequentially through limited mortal perception. The working we completed merely thinned the veil between threads of that greater fabric. The implications extended beyond metaphysical curiosities into profound questions of identity and continuity. The Thornfield bloodline had been fundamentally altered by the Covenant and its resolution, not merely our historical narrative, but our very essence. The silver sigil upon my chest occasionally resonated in proximity to certain artifacts throughout the house, revealing hidden caches of knowledge Josiah had concealed for future generations. Each discovery further illuminated the extraordinary foresight with which he had orchestrated redemption across centuries. Perhaps most significant was the transformation of Hawthorne Grange itself. The property had shed its centuries of accumulated dread, emerging as a nexus of restorative energy. The land yielded unprecedented harvests, while the house embraced its new inhabitants with palpable benevolence. Rooms previously plagued by inexplicable cold spots now maintained perfect comfort, regardless of external temperature. The very timbers seemed to have reconciled with their history, the occasional settling sounds no longer resembling human distress, but rather contented sighs. The resolution of the Thornfield Covenant had not merely corrected historical injustice, but had somehow recalibrated the metaphysical alignment of our entire lineage. We had become unwitting custodians of a rare harmony between temporal planes, a responsibility whose full implications remained yet to be understood. As winter yielded to an uncommonly vibrant spring, the transformation of Hawthorne Grange continued with subtle, yet profound alterations to its fundamental nature. The morning dew upon the lawns possessed an opalescent quality that lingered well past dawn, refracting sunlight into prismatic patterns across the ancient stonework. Birdsong attained harmonic complexities previously unheard in the region. Ornithologists traveling considerable distances to document what they termed anomalous melodic structures among common species. My relationship with Emily had evolved beyond mere familial reconnection into something approaching scholarly partnership. Her experiences within the collector's liminal realm had granted her unprecedented insights into medieval conceptions of purgatorial existence. While she could never explicitly reference her personal knowledge in academic publications, her theoretical frameworks revolutionized scholarship on transitional consciousness in pre-Enlightenment literature. One particularly significant evening, as we cataloged documents recovered from a previously undiscovered compartment beneath the library floorboards, Emily paused with uncharacteristic hesitation before extracting a slender volume bound in faded green leather. "This belonged to Augusta," she murmured, her fingers tracing the embossed initials with reverence. She continued her journal after that final entry, but in a separate volume, deliberately concealed from family scrutiny. The subsequent text revealed extraordinary insights into the Covenant's intergenerational design. Augusta had not succumbed to madness or supernatural terror, as previously assumed, but had instead become consciously complicit in preserving knowledge for future restoration. Her apparent silence had been strategic concealment rather than traumatized withdrawal. The collector requires 9 reflections to achieve reconstitution. Augusta had written in precise measured script. Each generation must preserve one vessel, while appearing to surrender it, maintaining the illusion of compliance while secretly advancing toward ultimate resolution. This revelation clarified the seemingly contradictory elements of our family history, the simultaneous prosperity and periodic sacrifice, the preserved knowledge alongside apparent ignorance. Each generation had knowingly contributed to the intricate mechanism of eventual restoration, carrying forward fragments of understanding that would culminate in our equinoctial working. Malign herself provided the final confirmation when she presented me with a small wooden box containing 8 silver thimbles, each engraved with the initials of a taken woman. "These were my anchors," she explained, her voice carrying the peculiar resonance of one who had experienced temporal expansion. Each woman surrendered not her soul, but her temporal fixity, allowing her consciousness to exist beyond conventional chronology while maintaining her essential identity. This elucidation transformed our understanding of the entire supernatural narrative. The collector had never been exclusively malign, nor exclusively vengeful spirit, but rather a composite entity formed through mutual necessity. Malign's consciousness preserving itself through consensual integration with those who followed, each woman sacrificing temporal continuity to maintain the delicate balance until restoration became possible. The 9th reflection, mine, had completed the circuit not through sacrifice, but recognition, acknowledging the complex interdependence spanning centuries of Thornfield existence. The chronicles of the Thornfield restoration attracted scholarly attention from unexpected quarters, culminating in a visit from Dr. Ambrose Stillwell of the Parapsychological Research Institute. His weathered countenance and penetrating gaze suggested decades spent traversing the boundary between conventional science and more esoteric realms of inquiry. Upon examining the 9 roses and their peculiar luminosity, he produced from his battered leather satchel a journal bound in faded crimson silk. This belonged to Eliza Chambers, a contemporary of Josiah Thornfield. He explained, handling the delicate volume with reverent caution. She documented similar phenomena in 7 locations across New England between 1848 and 1872. The journal, written in a meticulous feminine hand with violet ink similar to Augusta's, detailed what Eliza termed wounds in the fabric of temporal continuity, places where wrongful deaths had created persistent distortions in the metaphysical landscape. Most significantly, she had developed a comprehensive theory of transtemporal reconciliation that precisely described the restoration we had inadvertently completed. The number 9 represents completion within numerous mystical traditions. Dr. Stillwell elaborated as we examined Eliza's intricate diagrams beneath the library's amber illumination, but Thornfield appears unique in successfully achieving full restoration. The other 6 locations remain in various states of temporal distortion. The most revelatory passage in Eliza's journal concerned the nature of reflection itself. The reflective surface serves not merely as conduit, but as ontological framework, establishing parameters through which dislocated consciousness may achieve reintegration. When 9 reflections align in perfect chronological symmetry, the fragmented essence consolidates not into its original state, but into a transcendent amalgamation incorporating all subsequent permutations. This explained the curious duality of Maline's restored existence, her simultaneous embodiment of 17th-century herbalist and composite being of accumulated experiences across 4 centuries. She existed now as both singular and plural, her consciousness encompassing perspectives from multiple eras while maintaining cohesive identity. Most profound was Eliza's final observation, inscribed in trembling hand during her final days. The successful restoration creates not merely reconciliation, but transmutation of the affected bloodline. Those participating in completion become vessels of temporal permeability, gaining capacity to perceive and occasionally traverse the boundaries between moments. This gift or burden transfers through generations in diminishing potency, until the ninth descendant, who shall exhibit no extraordinary awareness unless confronted with similar metaphysical disruption. The implications settled upon me with crushing clarity: our family's occasional instances of prescience, our peculiar affinity for historical preservation, even our tendency toward scholarly pursuits examining boundaries between defined categories, all stemmed from this fundamental alteration of our temporal perception following Josiah's desperate covenant. The Thornfield legacy extended far beyond a haunting resolve. We had been subtly transformed at the most fundamental level, our perception of reality permanently altered by our ancestors' extraordinary intervention across centuries. The collector had never truly been external to us. She represented the metaphysical mechanism through which our lineage maintained its unusual connection to time's malleable fabric. Perhaps the most enduring consequence of that autumn equinox has manifested in my dreams, which no longer conform to conventional nocturnal narratives, but unfold as explorations through temporal corridors. Each night my consciousness traverses the Thornfield, ancestral memories with increasing fluidity, experiencing not mere recollections, but immersive participation in moments scattered across 4 centuries of family history. I have knelt beside Josiah as he inscribed the original covenant by candlelight, felt the quivering determination in his hand as he signed away generations of his descendants for immediate survival. I have stood unseen in Augusta's bedchamber as she whispered coded instructions to her daughter, preserving essential knowledge while appearing to succumb to superstitious terror. The physical landscape surrounding Hawthorne Grange has undergone transformation that defies botanical explanation. The soil, once typical of the region's clay composition, now exhibits extraordinary mineral properties that have attracted discreet scientific investigation. Crystalline structures form spontaneously beneath the 9 roses, complex lattice works of silicate compounds that replicate the pattern etched upon my chest in microscopic detail. Samples taken for laboratory analysis inexplicably revert to ordinary soil when transported beyond the property boundaries. Frustrating conventional documentation, but confirming the localized nature of our metaphysical recalibration. Local residents report altered perceptions when traversing the lane adjacent to our eastern boundary. Time moves with curious elasticity there, watches occasionally advancing or retreating several minutes without mechanical explanation. Mobile communications experiencing precise 7-second delays regardless of network congestion. Children walking home from school report glimpsing people dressed from history books among the trees, their descriptions matching Thornfield ancestors with remarkable accuracy despite having no access to family photographs. The psychological ramifications among those directly involved in the restoration have manifested in subtler ways. Professor Westcott, once rigidly empirical in her academic methodology, now incorporates phenomenological approaches that have revolutionized her field while simultaneously alienating more conservative colleagues. Her recent monograph on reflective surfaces as temporal interfaces in Victorian material culture has polarized scholarly opinion, though those who have visited Hawthorne Grange invariably become her most ardent defenders. The 8 returned women have formed a curious societal microcosm, their shared experience of liminal existence creating bonds transcending conventional temporal relationships. Despite the disparate eras of their origins, they communicate with remarkable synchronicity, often completing one another's thoughts or responding to unspoken questions. They gather monthly in Maline's cottage for what they term chronological calibration. Ritual conversations wherein each recounts her birth era to maintain distinct identity within their collective experience. Most significant is the subtle alteration in community records and collective memory. The Thornfield family history has undergone retroactive normalization in public perception, where once whispered rumors of cursed bloodlines and mysterious disappearances dominated local folklore. There now exists a curious lacuna. Historical documentation remains intact, yet emotional and social associations have been neutralized, as though centuries of supernatural disturbance had been gently excised from communal consciousness, leaving only academic acknowledgement without experiential resonance. The revelation arrived not as sudden epiphany, but through gradual crystallization of understanding, like morning mist resolving into distinct forms, beneath strengthening sunlight. Upon the summer solstice, precisely 1 year following Emily's return, Maline beckoned me to join her beneath the ancient oak that predated even her first life upon these lands. Its massive roots had partially exposed themselves over centuries, creating natural seats wherein generations of thornfields had sought refuge from both elements and troubled thoughts. The covenant was never merely with me, she explained, her fingers working dexterously at her embroidery, stitching patterns that subtly echoed the marking upon my chest. It was with time itself. The wind stirred the oak's leaves with peculiar intentionality, as though nature conspired to emphasize her words through gentle percussion. In the dappled light beneath the venerable canopy, Maline's features shifted subtly between her original countenance and fleeting impressions of the 8 women who had temporarily merged with her consciousness. A visual echo of her compound existence. Josiah discovered something fundamental about reality's architecture. She continued, her needle flashing silver in the fractured sunlight. The boundaries between moments are neither fixed nor impermeable. They may be traversed through correctly aligned intentions spanning generations. What Josiah had initiated was not merely supernatural bargain nor arcane ritual, but the first documented instance of familial chronological engineering, deliberate manipulation of temporal perception across bloodline connection. The wrongful drowning had created the initial breach in conventional time, while Josiah's desperate covenant had established the metaphysical framework through which eventual restoration could manifest. The Thornfield consciousness now exists partially outside conventional temporal constraints, she explained, her voice acquiring that resonant quality that suggested multiple perspectives speaking in harmony. You perceive sequence because human minds require narrative structure, but portions of your awareness now operate simultaneously across multiple moments. This elucidated the peculiar synchronicities that had manifested since the restoration, my occasional foreknowledge of conversations, not yet initiated. The preternatural understanding between returned women, despite their disparate historical origins, the crystalline structures replicating temporal mathematics beneath the 9 roses. Most profound was the realization regarding the silver markings upon my chest. Far from mere symbolic residue, they constituted a living map of Thornfield temporal consciousness, each intricate whorl representing a moment of significance across centuries, connected through delicate filaments of inherited awareness. The pattern occasionally shifted not through supernatural agency, but through my own evolving comprehension of our extraordinary familial heritage. As twilight descended upon Hawthorne Grange, bringing with it that peculiar illumination from the 9 roses, I understood finally that our restoration had not merely corrected historical injustice, but fundamentally altered the metaphysical architecture surrounding our bloodline. The Thornfield perception now encompassed simultaneous awareness of past, present, and potential futures, not with perfect clarity, but with sufficient connection to navigate existence with extraordinary perspective. We exist now as temporal anchors, Meline concluded, her embroidery complete, a perfect rendering of the obsidian obelisk surrounded by 9 reflective surfaces. Through us, the breach is healed, but the scar tissue remains permeable. This is both our inheritance and our responsibility, until the 9th generation following restoration. The seasons cycled through their eternal procession, bringing Hawthorne Grange into its 3rd autumn since the restoration, as russet leaves spiraled down from ancient boughs to carpet the grounds in crimson and amber. The 9 roses continued their impossible blooming, their luminosity intensifying with the lengthening darkness of approaching winter. The transformation of the estate had reached a harmonious equilibrium, no longer manifesting dramatic alterations, but rather settling into its new metaphysical architecture with the quiet dignity of established supernatural order. I observed these changes from the newly constructed observatory atop the eastern wing, a hexagonal chamber whose windows aligned precisely with astronomical markers significant to the Thornfield lineage. The glass panes crafted by an artisan working from Josiah's original specifications found in a previously undiscovered cache beneath the library hearth contain trace elements of silt from the mirror that had facilitated the restoration. Through these specialized portals, temporal fluctuations became visible as subtle ripples across the landscape, moments where past and present briefly overlapped in ghostly palimpsests. The returned women had integrated into contemporary existence with remarkable adaptation. Agnes now conducted historical preservation work, her first-hand knowledge of Victorian domesticity proving invaluable in authenticating period restorations. Catherine had established a fashion atelier specializing in designs that subtly incorporated elements spanning 3 centuries of sartorial evolution. Emily had completed her doctoral dissertation to considerable academic acclaim, though her peers remained unaware that her insights into liminal consciousness stemmed from personal experience rather than theoretical exploration. Meline had become the quiet epicenter of our transformed reality. Her cottage at the property's edge had evolved into a nexus where temporal boundaries remained permeable. Visitors reported curious distortions of chronological perception, conversations beginning at sunset somehow concluding with morning light streaming through windows. Though only minutes seemed to have passed, her garden produced herbs with properties that defied contemporary botanical classification, their efficacy in treating ailments tied somehow to the specific ancestral memories of those who consumed them. The silver markings upon my chest had stabilized into their final configuration, an intricate cartography of Thornfield consciousness across centuries. I had learned to interpret their subtle shifts as indicators of temporal fluctuations, requiring attention, moments where the careful balance established through restoration needed minute adjustments to maintain equilibrium. These interventions rarely demanded dramatic ritual, but rather specific acknowledgments of ancestral presence at particular locations throughout the estate. Most remarkable was the gradual dissolution of conventional barriers between generations. The Thornfield bloodline now existed in a state of temporal communion unprecedented in documented metaphysical experience. Our consciousness flowed across centuries, not as supernatural intervention, but as natural inheritance finally recognized and embraced. What had begun as desperate covenant had transformed into extraordinary gift, the ability to perceive existence not as linear progression, but as magnificent simultaneity, each moment eternally accessible through the peculiar permeable consciousness we now shared across time's elaborate tapestry. I stand now at the precipice of understanding that few mortals have glimpsed. The observatory at Hawthorne Grange has become my sanctum of contemplation, its hexagonal walls embracing me as a document this final entry. The amber glow from the 9 roses penetrates even this elevated chamber, casting elongated shadows that dance upon my journal pages with seemingly sentient purpose. Last evening, as the autumn equinox returned once more, the Thornfield gathering commenced beneath a sky of impossible clarity. The stars blazed with preternatural brilliance, celestial bodies revealing themselves in configurations untouched by light, pollution, or atmospheric distortion. Malign presided over our assembly, her compound existence now settled into a harmonious integration that allowed all aspects of her consciousness to speak with unified voice. The cycle completes itself, she announced as we formed a circle around the obsidian obelisk. What began in desperation concludes in understanding. The silver markings upon my chest illuminated with cold fire as the precise moment of equinoctial balance approached. Through the specialized lenses of my consciousness, I perceived the gathering not merely as contemporary assembly, but as temporal convergence. Every Thornfield who had contributed to our extraordinary lineage momentarily visible in spectral overlay, their expressions conveying recognition of completion. The 9 roses released their accumulated luminescence in a single breathtaking surge that ascended toward the vault of heaven like inverse lightning, a column of pearlescent radiance that briefly connected Earth to cosmos. Within this illumination, the final transformation of Hawthorne Grange manifested. The property no longer merely existed as geographical location, but as nexus of conscious temporality, a place where the artificial boundaries between moments dissolved into their natural permeability. I understand now that our restoration was never meant to conclude, but to initiate, to establish a foundation for perception transcending conventional chronological constraints. The Thornfield legacy extends not merely backward through documented history, but forward into potentialities yet unrealized. We have become custodians of temporal consciousness, preserving the delicate architecture of metaphysical continuity through our very existence. As dawn approaches on this autumn morning, I set down my pen with the peculiar certainty that these words exist simultaneously across all moments, past, present, and future, converging in the simple act of documentation. The silver markings upon my chest pulse with gentle rhythm, synchronizing with the eternal heartbeat of time itself. The Thornfield covenant, begun in desperate bargain, has transformed into extraordinary inheritance. Through careful stewardship of memory and meticulous preservation of ancestral connection, we have transcended the limitations of sequential existence. What was once perceived as supernatural haunting has revealed itself as the natural consequence of consciousness, expanding beyond conventional temporal boundaries. The morning mist rises from the grounds of Hawthorne Grange, veiling the 9 roses in diaphanous embrace. Within its swirling tendrils, I glimpse fleeting impressions of what has been, what is, and what shall be, all existing in perfect eternal simultaneity. Until next time, remember that some stories are best left untold.